That deal between Ukraine and Russia to allow the export of grain through the Black Sea is on a knife edge after the Russian missiles struck the Ukrainian port of Odessa just 24 hours after the deal had been agreed. The attack has been condemned as barbarism by the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and it comes as Ukrainian forces were preparing an assault on occupied Kherson, with President Zelensky promising to retake the southern region by September. But meanwhile, the Russians have seized a key power plant intact, which may have a bearing on all of this. For the latest on the military front and elsewhere in Ukraine, we're joined from Western Ukraine by independent journalist Olga Tokariuk. Olga, good morning.
Good morning, Pat.
Now, can you tell us the significance, first of all, of the Russians seizing a power plant, which I presume is in working order? It's coal-fired, it's Soviet era, but an important part of power supply in Ukraine.
Yes, well, that power plant was seized in Volhyyrsk. It's a town in Donetsk region, so eastern Ukraine, where Russians actually are having the relatively most success up till now in their advance on Ukrainian territory. So while Luhansk region is almost totally under Russian control now, they are still failing to occupy most of Donetsk regions. But so seizure of this power plant is a part of their plan to move further, to gain some territory, and to seize also control of the important infrastructure objects and the objects that ensure the normal life of citizens there. Although we cannot speak about normal life in Donetsk region, actually the majority of cities that are still under Ukrainian control there, but very close to the front line, they've been living without electricity, without gas, and sometimes without running water for some period of time. And actually the governor of Donetsk, the Ukrainian government appointed governor, he urges the residents to leave because exactly he says that the winter will be very harsh. It's very likely that there will be no heating, that in addition to constant bombing and the constant risk that Russians might move in and occupy more territory in Donetsk region. So he's urging the residents to leave, not to wait until winter when they might be freezing also, because there will be no possibility to heat their homes.
Now, we have seen that President Putin is prepared to use food as a weapon in this war. He's prepared to cause starvation in other parts of the world by preventing the grain from being exported, and we'll talk about that deal in a moment. But now he is showing that he can use electricity as a weapon of war, depriving people of heat and light, even the ability perhaps to pump water and sewage and so on. He will affect civilian populations deeply. That's part of his strategy.
Exactly. Russia is waging a hybrid war, so it's not a war waged with military means, not only on Ukrainian territory, but as you mentioned, he's trying also to starve the population in other parts of the world, to influence public opinion and the political situation in Western democracies. But in Ukraine, of course, attacking civilian targets has been a strategy of the Russian army from day one of this full-scale invasion. And it's not just Donbass, even on Ukrainian government-controlled territory in south of Ukraine, in the city of Mykolaiv, for example, every day Russia is shelling that city, destroying residential buildings, but also damaging crucial infrastructure there. So the city of Mykolaiv, which is a regional center, so hundreds of thousands of people lived there before the war. Part of those people have left since the war started. So that city has been living without running water for weeks already, and the constant threat of new attacks forces residents to flee. So it also looks like a deliberate strategy, to create more refugees, more internally displaced people, to show Ukrainians that no part of the country is safe, also because their needs of their, the livelihood cannot be ensured.
You wonder what his long-term plan is for that region, for the two provinces, because many of the cities will be unlivable in. He will have destroyed them so much. I wonder, is the idea very much like the English did in Ireland? You lay waste to a place, get rid of the people, and then you bring what we would call planters in. Is he going to bring Russian people in to expand the boundaries of Russia on Ukrainian territory?
Well, this is already happening in the occupied Kherson in south of Ukraine, especially. Like Russia is sending, along with some special forces and representatives of law enforcement from Russia, to conduct repressions and to suppress the pro-Ukrainian sentiment. They are sending a lot of teachers because they are trying to switch the schools there to Russian curriculum to indoctrinate children with the Russian interpretation of Ukrainian history, to tell them that actually this is a Russian land and it has always been. So this is already happening, this resettlement. We see it also in Mariupol, from where a lot of people have been deported to Russia and other parts of Donbass. So Ukrainian population is being sent to sometimes even remote areas, remote regions of Russia, and instead people from Russia being brought in. But that will probably happen once the infrastructure is restored, and it will take a lot of time because Russia also doesn't have enough resources to do that, and it doesn't seem to have a lot of interest in doing that. So in Mariupol, for example, people still live there, but the city is completely destroyed, and the sewage system is not functioning. There is no drinking water, no electricity. People are cooking on stoves on the streets, but it's only possible while it's still summer, it's still warm. What will happen there in the winter, we can only guess.
Now, you have been around Ukraine where buildings and other infrastructure has suffered damage, and it seems that in some places Ukrainians are rebuilding and reoccupying.
Absolutely. This is remarkable. Ukraine is a huge country. The territory is the biggest in Europe, the biggest in Europe in terms of the area. So the situation is very different depending on where you go. And in those parts of Ukraine that were briefly under Russian occupation in the initial stage of this full-scale war, it's Kyiv region or Chernihiv region in the north of Ukraine. I visited them last week, and I can confirm that a normal life or a resemblance of normal life is slowly being back there. And it's remarkable to see a volunteer effort, how many people from different parts of Ukraine are coming to rebuild the destroyed housing. Also in the villages in Chernihiv region, I met some volunteers from other countries, like from the UK there. So it's not just Ukrainians who are contributing to that. And the bridges that have been destroyed, like the entry of to Chernihiv has been replaced with a temporary bridge. So there are repair works underway, but it's still like a very vulnerable situation because you can rebuild, but no one will give you a guarantee that tomorrow it will not be destroyed again. And today in the morning, all Ukrainians woke up at 4 a.m. again with air raid alerts because Russians were launching about 20 missiles on Ukraine's north. So specifically on Kyiv and Chernihiv regions, that seemed so calm just last week when I was there. But today again, they were attacked by Russian missiles.
Now, in terms of the military conflict, Ukraine has been asking for more and more sophisticated weaponry and has accepted delivery of certain amounts and very effective missile systems. What difference is that making to the war, and is Ukraine confident that those supplies can continue?
This is making a huge difference on the ground. And you've mentioned that Ukrainian president pledged to liberate Kherson in south of Ukraine. It's the biggest city, the only actually regional center that has been occupied by Russians since the beginning of this full-scale war. And in liberating Kherson, these systems are, extremely important. This long-range missile systems called HIMARS are already making a big difference on the battlefield because Ukraine was able to destroy dozens of Russian ammunition depots thanks to them. Also, a few days ago, a crucial bridge in Kherson was damaged by Ukrainian armed forces using this long-range Western weaponry, which will significantly complicate the ability of Russians to maintain logistics with that part of Ukraine. So Russians are actually quite panicking. We can see that also in the intercepted communication of Russian military. They are panicking about this new Western weapons deliveries to Ukraine. They can't counter them in any way. And, it gives a lot of encouragement to the Ukrainian government and citizens, including those in these occupied cities that are waiting for their liberation by the Ukrainian army, that actually it is possible if more weapons of this type continue to arrive to Ukraine.
Now, the question of the grain export through the Black Sea, which a deal was signed with the brokering of Turkey and the United Nations between the Russian side and the Ukrainian side. And then, of course, Putin ordered the bombing of Ukraine, of Odessa. They said it was a military target, not an infrastructural civilian target. But, I mean, who would trust the Russians after such an attack only 24 hours later? So what needs to happen? I mean, does anyone believe the Russians will honour their word? Because you just simply cannot believe anything they say.
Absolutely. I think no one definitely here in Ukraine believes them. Maybe there are some hopes in the UN that helped to broker this deal, although the reaction of the UN Secretary General to this bombing, well, not Secretary General, there was some other official from the UN who was quoted as saying that, well, maybe Russians, it was not as bad that they bombed this infrastructure object in the port of Odessa because it was not the grain terminal. Then the UN had to backtrack on that statement. So, the expectations are quite low. Actually, the reports are indicating that this export should start these days, maybe even today or tomorrow. The reports were indicating that, but we'll have to actually see how it goes. There is very little trust in Russia honoring its agreement. And there is also a lot of pressure on the Turkish President Erdogan, who was one of the brokers of this deal and who was also under fire after Russia, bombed Odessa the next day. So Turkey is helping actually Russia to transport some of the grain it stole from Ukraine, from the occupied Ukrainian land in the south. There are multiple confirmations that Turkish ports are accepting Russian ships loaded with the stolen Ukrainian grain. So there is, let's say, not that much trust also in the mediation of Turkey. But let's wait and see, before drawing any conclusions.
It's said that the Russians want to gain a public relations advantage in Africa, for instance, which would be hugely affected if Ukrainian grain cannot be exported. And obviously the Chinese are very active in Africa. Is that going to work? Because I think public relations between Russia and the rest of the world, by and large, is on the floor.
Well, we are seeing Sergei Lavrov, Russian foreign minister, on a tour of Africa, trying to, maintain contacts and persuade his African counterparts to somehow side with Russia, or at least trust Russia more than people on other continents do at this point. I think Africans will be also watching the developments very closely, and people there won't be deceived if they see that Russia is not delivering in what it itself promised. So, the variable here is Russian actions. I think the politicians and the public on all continents cannot be fooled for a long time with Russian statements if Russian actions do not correspond, what it says.
Olga, thank you very much for joining us. That's Olga Tokariuk, independent journalist working in Ukraine.